Okay, so shall we talk about history lessons at school then?
Yeah, we can.
What do you remember studying in history at school?
The Tudors, the Industrial Revolution. I did Russia, Germany. There was never anything about colonial history, about the British Empire, the Caribbean, India. There was none of that.
Did you do the Battle of Hastings?
Yep, 1066.
Did you do Fire of London?
Yeah, we sang the songs. It's all very nostalgic of English history. That's what I gathered from. I did history A-level as well, and it was all so westernised and very narrow-minded. There was no global history. I had to go to uni to learn about South Asian history.
Amazing.
So
and what did you take when you went to university?
I did South Asia and English. So I went to SOAS because I specifically wanted to have an education about my heritage, my history, global literature, because that was something that was never offered on the school curriculum. And I think it's such a shame because, especially in somewhere like Birmingham, we live in such a diverse city, country, and none of that is reflected in the curriculums.
Yes, I sometimes think, well, there's such an opportunity living in Birmingham to study global Birmingham and what is the global history of Birmingham, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Can you remember the sorts of things that you studied?
Oh, just like trade unions and how like the energy and everything, like all of the work ethics of the time. It was never really, and poverty. It was all a lot about the workhouses and the state of English people. There was never anything about what the Industrial Revolution was doing on a global scale or the interconnectedness of what was happening in Birmingham and London and the rest of the world. There was none of that.
Still, it sounds a bit of a fuller social history than even when I was at school. And
things progress, don't they? But...
hopefully. And how does that history make you relate to heritage sites, museums, and these sorts of places? What sort of a relationship would you say you have with those places?
Until we went to Season Co, I had a very removed relationship with stately homes, with English history, because I never saw my own positionality within that. It was always, this is Regency England, this is Tudor England, this house belonged to this governor of this place, and it was never something that I felt I belonged within or I could situate myself in. I've been to so many stately homes with school trips, I've been on family day outs, and I've never seen a stately home that actually represented the global relationship of England and the rest of the world.
That's really interesting. So did your eyes sort of glaze over? You didn't feel you could really relate to what you were seeing? And now, describe what it was like going to Season Coat. Did you know about the place?
No, I found out about it two weeks before I went, and I remember looking at images of it on Google before we went, and I was just astounded that it actually existed an hour away from Birmingham. And even on the website, they call it India in the Cotswolds, which I think is a bit reductive, but it was incredible to see something that was a physical manifestation of the colonial relationship with India and how they absorbed our culture, our ideas, our architecture, and situated it in the middle of such an idyllically English place like the Cotswolds.
And what about your relationship with the countryside more broadly? How would you describe that?
I don't have one at all. I grew up in inner city Birmingham. I've never really spent a lot of time in the countryside. I've been to like Snowdon and things like that, but I've never seen somewhere in the countryside where I felt I had a right to be there. I always felt quite out of place in the countryside. And going to Season Coat, I actually felt like this is part of my history as well. This isn't just English history, this is mine. So that was quite overwhelming in a way, and it was almost like a coming home to my own country again.
That's fascinating, because one of the things that's been argued many times that I've heard people say, well, there's a traumatic side to this history and it will actually put people off heritage sites if they have any ancestral or cultural connection to it at all. That's not what you're saying. You seem to be saying quite the opposite, that you didn't have a naive understanding of that site. You recognise that there's cruelty and violence behind it, but at the same time it's somehow drawing you in.
Yeah, I think partly because of the education that I've given myself and I've proactively tried to discover. I know a lot about my own history and my own culture, but I think a place like Season Coat presents the opportunity for us to analyse the colonial relationship. We can see that the English governors like Hastings and Cockrell, I think his name was, they appreciated Indian culture. They didn't just pillage it. Obviously, they did that as well, but they respected us in some way, and that's the thing that I think is often overlooked. English people didn't just come to India to colonize us and take our spices and take our gold. They wanted to learn about us as well, and somewhere like Season Cove is a perfect opportunity for schools, young people, young British Indian people to discover that double-edged sword of colonialism in a way.
I think that's fascinating, because that's all about how, you're saying that the English developed an appreciation, however troubling it was in some ways, of Indian aesthetics and cultures, and were fascinated by it as much as they were involved in all other kinds of ways with it as well. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think we were talking a lot when we were there.
So you say that you've educated yourself about all aspects of your Indian heritage, but you're British born fundamentally, and you're from this place, and you're a Brummie, really, like me. And when you go to Season Cove, it's maybe quite complicated, your relationship with that history. Could you describe how you see that?
Yeah, I was quite conflicted when I was there, because you look at it and it's such a beautiful piece of architecture, and then you go inside and everything's very Regency England, and that for me raised the issue of exoticism and Orientalism, because our architecture and the way we landscape our gardens is good enough for you to make a spectacle out of on the outside, but inside you want everything to be traditionally and superior and English. And I think that was the conflict that I had when I was there. But I think more so than that, it's about how people receive the place. There were a few visitors there when we were there, and I overheard a few conversations, and people weren't thinking critically about it as a piece of history. People were admiring the gardens and, oh, isn't that a nice snake in the pond? And that for me is the issue. I think a building like that, a place like that, should be a springboard for us to discuss the difficult aspects of English history, of British history, because we don't always do that. And the visitors there, I think we were the only Indian people there, British Indian people there. And I think it's such an important thing for British Indian people to know about. I've had a few conversations since I went on Wednesday, and no Indian person I know, no British Indian person I know that lives in Birmingham has heard of this place before. And I think it's our responsibility to use historical pieces of land like this as an opportunity for education, if anything.
Absolutely.